Join us on a journey where we unravel the latest trends, tackle your burning questions, and explore innovative strategies that are shaping the future of compensation, all with a cup of coffee in hand. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Comp and Coffee, where we aim to serve up fresh insights on all things compensation, HR, and rewards. I'm your host, Ruth Thomas, and today we're brewing up the latest insights from Payscale's 2025 Gender Pay Gap Report. And I have joining me Lexi Clarke, Chief People Officer, and Kate Peter, Chief Customer Officer at Payscale. In this episode, we're going to stir up a conversation not only about the persistent gender pay gap and the role of pay transparency, but we're also going to dig into what it's like being a woman navigating leadership and the C-suite. So Lexi and Kate are going to share some of their experiences and insights in terms of navigating leadership roles as women and the challenges that they faced. So grab your favorite mug, settle in, and let's sit through the facts and strategies for a more equitable workplace. So, Lexi, welcome back to the podcast. And Kate, you're a newbie here. Can you both give the audience a quick hi and an intro to your role here and how briefly you got here?
Yes. Do you want me to go first, Kate?
Yeah, go, Lexi.
Hello. Thank you for having me back. My name is Lexi Clarke, Chief People Officer at Payscale. I've been fortunate to be on the podcast with Ruth before, but coming up on 5 years at Payscale, which is wild to say out loud. But I joined Payscale back in 2020. Before joining Payscale, I was a customer at Payscale early in my career, so always knew a little bit of what we were doing. Obviously, a close space to the HR space. So just always excited about the customers that we're serving and the work that we're doing within the industry. Previous to Payscale, most of my experience was spent in early to mid-stage tech, mostly in the Seattle area where I am still based today. But, I started my career in HR. I, fell into a startup at the time. I didn't really know what a startup was at the time, and I didn't really know what that all meant. But it was a great kind of playground, I think, for me to really understand what building looked like. It was a series, somewhere between a Series C and a Series D company. That was VC backed at a very kind of hot flash sales space, which was amazing in 2012 when I joined. And, I got to do a lot of kind of building and scale there. And that's kind of been I would say the trend throughout my journey through HR. I spent, a little bit of a chunk of a time at a larger company just to get some experience at mega scale, but then ultimately went back to building because I think it's where my heart and soul have been. And so spent a couple of years pre and post IPO at Redfin in the Seattle area, and then moved on to a startup called Convoy at the time. Again, all focused on scaling the company from an employee standpoint, but also scaling revenue and wearing a lot of different hats along the way in the HR space. So most of my career has been spent in the business partner space, but I have really loved every opportunity that I've gotten to branch out and just take advantage of the moments where there was a gap and use that as like a learning opportunity for myself. And I think that has played a big role in, how I got to kind of the place at Payscale that I'm at today. Ruth has been here for most of my journey along the way as well, but just taking advantage, I think, of those moments where, see a gap and help fix that gap has been a really kind of big part of the mantra maybe of my career so far.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Kate, you joined in November last year, I think.
Yes. So coming up on 5 months. And I keep telling everybody it feels like 5 months, 5 minutes, 5 years, because my love for this place has sort of exploded over the last 5 months, but also, we're doing a lot of transformational things. So it's just been a great journey. So yes, about 5 months in, I should introduce myself probably a little bit better than that. I'm Kate Peter, Chief Customer Officer here at Payscale. My background is actually it's had HR sprinkled in along the way quite a few times. But I really have focused on the customer journey and what it looks like to make sure that, companies really transform to be customer centric in every single thing that we do. And I got into that by reading a book 12 years, 10 years ago now, that a company called Gainsight wrote around, the subscription economy that a lot of us find ourselves in, especially if you're in software or tech out there, and the need for us to actually build out programs that that drive retention in the customer base. And so that's a passion of mine. And a part of that passion, aligned with, you've got to have really good employee experience too, because the customer experience is only as good as the employees who love what they're doing at the company they're at. So I'm so blessed and honored to have the career that I've had and to make it to the chief customer officer role. But I'm just really excited to now work at a company where equity is first and foremost, because it's just so deeply aligns with who I am as a leader and a person, and also the way I see working with customers too. So very, very lucky to be here. It's been a great first 5 months. I am pinching myself, Ruth, when you asked me to be on this podcast, because I felt like I had made it, especially because Lexi's on here too. And I just love this. I love that we're three strong women talking about, how we can get more equity in the workplace, but also sharing the wisdom that we have learned as women to help the women coming up behind us as well.
Well, thank you for that intro, Kate, and for giving me the segue to equity, because we're anchoring our conversation today around the release of our gender pay gap report, which we released here at Payscale on March the 12th. And that's where we take a look at one of our data sets, the employee reported data set, and we calculate both the controlled and uncontrolled pay gaps year over year. We've been doing this research for over 15 years. And we also use our research to kind of look deeper into some of the causes of the pay gap. And this year we saw in our data that the controlled pay gap, which is when you compare people in like roles, when we're comparing for job level experience and location, job title experience and location, we saw this year the controlled pay gap was at 99 cents on the dollar. So women make 99 cents on the dollar for every $1 a man makes. And the uncontrolled pay gap, which is the average pay gap, or sometimes known as the opportunity gap, that stayed at 83 cents on the dollar for every $1 a man makes. So we saw no change in our data this year, which is concerning. So that's stalling of the pay gaps. And it's something if we look back to 22, we haven't really seen a change in our numbers since then. So Lexi, you followed our research year over year. Why do you have any thoughts on why the pay gap's been stalling since 2022?
I have so many personal feelings and so many professional feelings that I could share. I'll go mostly professional, but you'll probably hear a little bit of personal come out along the way. I don't think there's not one definitive reason. I think, based on kind of what Ruth, you and I have talked about and like what we've seen in the research, I do think that this is and has been a systemic issue. And I think that it takes a long time or a big move to actually solve a systemic issue and resolve it in a way that we've seen. I think some of it is interesting considering kind of the change of political landscape and the administration, as we move deeper into 2025. But again, this research is not based off of 2025. This research is based off of years before. I think COVID was a massive impact. I think we saw that both with leaving the workforce, but also re-entering the workforce over the last few years, and the impact that can have, I think, on pay. But that, specifically, I think took a toll on women, and I think women who had children at home and were the primary caregiver in their household. But I also think, it's interesting, I think, even along all of the conversation around pay transparency, and pay equity over the last few years, a lot of companies, and one of the things Ruth, you and I have talked about a lot of companies have tried to resolve some of the challenges in a support of pay transparency, right? Like if my ranges are going to be transparent, that means that I have to go solve some of the skeletons in my closet in order to get to a place where I feel comfortable explaining it to employees. I think that is a great forcing function, but I don't think that it actually solves the beginning or top of funnel of a lot of these problems. And unless you go all the way to top of funnel, whether top of funnel for you means how you're sourcing candidates, it means how you're engaging in conversations with candidates about pay, it means how you're making compensation decisions. Like, unless you get to the root cause of a lot of that, I don't think that we'll see, this gap actually start to close. But I think it takes more than just the conversation around, can I fix the thing that's going to be transparent to my organization, to, hey, I'm going to take this on as kind of like a personal mission to figure out where the problem starts so that I never have to have this problem again. And this is something I know we've talked about both internal to Payscale, but also external, is that like, a pay equity analysis from a compliance standpoint is the right thing to do. The hope is that once you start to go down that process, you're taking so many proactive steps that as a reactive step doesn't actually bring up a whole lot to solve, because you've solved so much of the proactive process before that. I just don't think, companies are quite there yet. And that is for, a lot of different reasons. But again, I go back to like, this is a systemic and has been a systemic problem for how long? And you need that type of proactive movement in order to make that happen. And that movement is not all on the total rewards team or the HR team. And I think that's really important to call out too.
Yeah, I think, there's still some big structural changes that need to happen to unlock those systemic blockages. And there's a lot of change going on in the places that we work at the moment. I think we will get there, but they're just taking some time to unlock. But interesting, when we look at the data, Kate, tech, finance and healthcare continue to show the largest gender pay gaps in our research. Now, you've worked in tech for much of your career. Any observations to why that happens? Why does the tech sector have one of the largest pay gaps?
I think one of the most interesting pieces of our research for me, because I'm going to be honest, I've been asking myself this question all along. It's like, as long as you get the right pool of candidates in, then you're hiring equitably. And you would go out to search for specific candidates and you weren't finding the candidates. And so part of that is because right now we've got, 47% is what we are, women, in the workforce in the US. And I know I'm talking US here, Ruth, but in the US. But we're only 35% of the STEM workers. And so when I think about the pool there, it's sort of like, okay, chicken or the egg, like how are we solving for this? And I think about my daughters, I think about the STEM programs of the future. I think about, sort of the biases around like, even the old biases that I hear even from like grandparents and such about like, you should go be an X if they're talking to my daughters versus like, or an engineer, right? Like, let's talk about it. So I think that we have a long way to go. But when I specifically think about the tech sector, we've got to be training much, much earlier so that that pool of candidates is ripe with people. And then we have to start making exceptions to making sure that no matter what, there are women in that pipeline. Like it may take longer, it may be harder, it may not be as robust, but we have to do something there. So every time I've sat in a position at a tech company where I am hiring, I've noticed that difference in the pool, and it just takes a little bit longer, but it's worth it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, as I said, in our report, we kind of break down looking at the gender pay gap in different ways. And one of the ways we look at it is vertically across organizations. So we look at the gender imbalance and we can see that obviously as you ascend the corporate ladder, the pay gaps get wider. And women are underrepresented in leadership roles compared to men. And even at the executive level, we see that women earn 93 cents on the dollar for every dollar a man makes. Lexi, why do we think that is? Why do we get that gender imbalance? Why do we get those pay gaps as we go up the organization?
I do think there's, and something I think we've talked about a lot in the last year and, internal at Payscale, I think it was the midpoint of 2024, we had a moment where we looked at our referrals data and we, were reminded that there is a referral bias, like you hire people that look like you. And so if you are already in a position where your more senior leaders or your executive team is male, you're more likely, if you're bringing in folks that are referrals, for those folks to look or sound like them or have a similar background. And so, I love what Kate said about being so much more intentional in your efforts. And it was interesting, like Ruth, you were there for, that conversation or initial conversation we had as an executive team. And it is interesting how just having the conversation sometimes lights the fire. For us, I think like it was having the conversation and our executive team is very data driven. But as is our CEO, and I think the presenting of the data, sparks a different discussion just in and of itself. And then it's something you can't quite let go of. Like it's always kind of stuck in your brain. But I think the intentionality is real. I mean, it starts with everything that Kate said, right? Which is that, when we are looking at going all the way back to like, what a little girl wants to be when they grow up, right? We're still in a place in 2025 where we're having similar conversations that then we try and solve when we all get into the corporate world. And the reality is, I think until we can solve or start to have different conversations early on, we're not going to solve that. But, I think for us, we sit in a place where 50% of our executive team is female.
I know.
And that's amazing. And then, Kate shared something, and I'll let her, broaden on this story, but Kate shared something, her first day was a board meeting, bless her. But and to sit around the board table and have so much female representation in our board as well. And I think that makes a big difference too. But it's a lot of intentionality to get there. That has not always been the landscape of our executive team. But I think it takes intentional effort. And I do think you've got to be mindful of things like I use referrals as like one example. But that's real, right? And then you've got to look at some of the traits, even the traits that you look for in a senior leader, and make sure that you don't have bias in the traits that you're looking for in executive search or a senior level search as well. Because a lot of those things, because history has been where it has been, are targeted towards men. Like that is just kind of a history of where we've been. And so I think like flipping the script or challenging some of those things along, it's the only way that I think that you get there. And I think, finding places for buy-in using data, I think for us internally has been a huge kind of part of our journey.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with many organizations to help them understand why they have the pay gaps that they have. And, I just say, just look at the data, go and analyze how many people are applying for the roles in your organization, how many people are making first interview, how many people are making second interview, how many people are making hire, how many people are making promotion, and just look at the numbers. And it's not something that necessarily you're intentionally doing within the organization, but it happens. Yes. And once you see that data, as you say, Lexi, I mean, we had the same conversation around referrals, as you say, it's something that you can't unsee.
Yes.
Yes. And then you want to act on it, and then you want to make it better. So
I think something really interesting that happened to me right after the board meeting, Lexi, was that the next thing we did was we went to our private equity company, Francisco Partners Women Summit, right? And I remember my husband, who is a father of two girls, who is the most like feminist man I've ever met, looked at me and was like, well, don't you think, he asked a question, and I know we're on a podcast, so I could be a little provocative. He was like, don't you think that it's interesting that you have to have those? Like, when do we get to a day, like, isn't having that and calling it women almost like saying that it's this different model? Like, when do you not have, and I remember being like, that's a fair point. Like, we want to get to the point where one day it's just the executive summit and we're already there. And I thought, but I'm like, but if we're not intentional, if we're not breaking some glass and some barriers by supporting each other, we're never going to get to that point. And it wasn't that he was asking that because he was like, this is a silly summit. He was like, when does it all come together? And I was like, not yet until we are very, very intentional about opening up the conversation and being honest. And at that summit was where I heard women executives on the stage talk about menopause and perimenopause. I heard them talk about motherhood. The speakers that they brought in were these phenomenal women who broke some sort of glass in their career. And I was like, until those things that I just said aren't an anomaly, we still have to keep pushing and having these conversations. So yeah, my first week was crazy. Wonderful, crazy.
It was crazy good though. Her and I got to get
crazy good. I got goosebumps so many times that week, and I definitely had like a tearful moment where I stood up and was like, I love all the women here. That's amazing.
Right. Now, you mentioned motherhood. Motherhood penalty is one of the things we explore in our gender pay gap report. Yeah. We see it showing up in our data in terms of how once women decide to have children, the pay gap gets bigger for them. And when they come back to work, it never recovers. Kate, Kate, you're a mother, as you said, of 2 young girls. How have you confronted the motherhood penalty in your career? How have you managed that? And you're sitting here in the C-suite today.
Sure. I'll be honest, probably in the beginning, I listened a little too much. This will be 8 years ago, where I was like, okay, well, I just shouldn't take that next role yet because technically I'm pregnant. Even though I had been in leadership for years before that, I was like, maybe this isn't the right time. And you know what? That might be true for people listening, and that is totally fine. But for me, I let some of the voices around me say those things. And with the motherhood guilt of like, you never get this time back, like so much of that is put on women. What if you miss it? You only get this once. They grow up so fast. Every time somehow for me that they say they grow up so fast, it is not a shot at me. They are coming from their own place of being sad that their kids are no longer small, whatever, what have you. But it made me feel guilty a lot. And so in the beginning with my first daughter, I let that be a thing. And then I came back from that and I was like, you know what? I just had a daughter. It's part of, I want to show her that what strong looks like. And I want to be messy in front of her. And I don't believe there's perfect in both. I don't believe you can be perfect at work and perfect at home. But what if I show her what actively being open and authentic about the messiness and about how I got here look like? So that's the trigger for me where I switched my career. I switched even like the way that I would talk about LinkedIn, the future book I want to write, where I was just very open and authentic about I'm a mother, I had postpartum depression, I had postpartum anxiety disorder, and I'm neurodiverse. But I can still do this. I can still do this, and I can show you guys what it looks like to do it authentically and lead authentically. But it was only because it was a lot of self buildup. It was a lot of like therapy and all these things. It wasn't because it necessarily 8 years ago felt safe to do that, right? And so I think part of this, as the C-suite sitting here, is we have the opportunity to show people taking that risk, being vulnerable, being authentic, being open about the struggles that we have, even when the naysayers want to say what they want to say, allows the younger generation of women to be open about it. So now I literally call myself a superwoman for having kids. It doesn't mean people who don't aren't, but it means the way I can multitask, holy smokes, right? And I try to use that in front of other women leaders who report to me to say, don't apologize when your kid comes in. Don't, have a moment where, oh my God, there was some illness breakout at school. I'm going to just be on this Zoom anyway while I'm walking to make sure that people don't see. Own the fact that this is messy. Own the fact that no matter what, as a female leader, you are going to get shit done. Probably we shouldn't curse on this. And really just feel less risky about owning that power. I think we have a long way to go. I think there are some voices out there that are really good at this. But I absolutely have moments of watching a man next to me be like, oh, my wife handles all that or what have you if they are parents, and being like, well, that's not an option for me. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's a messy answer in and of itself because it's messy. I think there isn't a perfect way that I got here, but I'll say that the way that I woke up every morning and said it was okay was looking at my daughters and being like, hopefully the mess mommy's making is one that'll clean it up for you later.
And I would say, the feedback that we've got within the organization, you definitely have been that role model for many women in the organization. And so, how you showed up authentically and shared those experiences has had a massive impact, I know, on other women and women leaders at the organization. So I think my own experience, I mean, my 2 daughters, I have 2 daughters too. They're now 21 and 23. I had to try and remember their ages. So it was a while ago, back in the early noughties. I was working in investment banking, in financial services, the industry that has the widest pay gap out there for many reasons we know. And I had a choice about to keep pushing against a system that wasn't built for working mothers, or to carve out my own career or a new path for me on my own terms. And I think that was what I decided to do. So I founded my own company, crazily, because that's the kind of thing you do when you have 2 children under the age of 4. But it gave me a way to lead, to innovate, grow in ways that a traditional structure wouldn't allow me. And it gave me kind of freedom to organize my time around my family when I needed to. And I still think, I mean, gosh, what is this women guilt? I still feel guilty about, did I give up? Like, did I give up on the system and not fight it? But I do like to think that everything I've done since then has been impactful and has made a difference. And particularly with the work that I focused in on around, tackling gender pay gaps, tackling pay equity, I feel I got to a good place, and maybe I should put that guilt to one side.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I think it's really funny, Ruth. I'm sure you get this sometimes. Like, I found myself just at the board meeting with, we have quite a few women on our board who have kids. And I found myself asking them, like, how do you do it? Like, how do you, and as I'm saying it, I'm like, what? Like, there is no answer that's going to be perfect here. Like, why am I seeking out some like release of my own guilt or some like magic way of handling this? Because there isn't one. I think what's good is that you sit in like, okay, I really deserve this. I really deserve to have both. And during their small childhood, and even when it gets a little bit trickier, and you could tell me about all the bad stuff in teenage years, Ruth, so that I'm prepared when it comes, that it doesn't, like, I am good enough in this moment, the way that I'm doing it. And so I've actually, after that board meeting, asked myself to stop doing that. Like, stop asking another woman, like, how do you do it? Not because you shouldn't be asking women that you respect how they do things, but because in that moment, I put her in the same situation of like, well, I don't have no, like, you're just good enough. And that's what I've settled on. I hope people can get there too. Like, you're good enough in what you're doing.
Yeah. So, Lexi, in your role of Chief People Officer, you're somewhat the custodian of pay equity in the organisation. How do you make sure that comes to life in the organisation? And what role does HR have to play in like ensuring pay equity and helping to close pay gaps?
Yeah, it's been, listen, when I joined Payscale, one of the things that I think has been amazing, that has been something that we've had for the whole time that I'm here, but I think like, and then Ruth will get into kind of your answer, but like we are almost 50-50 on our gender split across the company. And that has been something I don't think I've ever really experienced in my career. Some of that, when I first got here, I was like, okay, is it the space that we're in? And HR tends to be more women, right? Or kind of some of those pieces. But I think what's been really exciting, especially over the last, I would say, and Ruth, you should keep me honest, I would say like over the last year, or even over the last kind of like year to 18 months, is that, I feel surrounded by so many amazing women, and I have in the time that I've worked here. But I think that there's been, an even more kind of an intentional effort in finding some of those amazing humans that have joined us, or that we have found in the organization that are just doing incredible work that have been kind of promoted up through the org as well. And I think, it's one thing to have that gender split. It's another thing then to get into like, okay, what levels in the organization do those folks sit at? And where do we still have systemic challenges that we have to go and solve? Some of what, from a practitioner point of view, that has made it easier for me. And by easier, I mean, it's not easy, but like, I'm just going to say it out loud, has been transparently sharing where we have challenges, or transparently talking about those things at a full company level, because there is natural accountability there. Like, it is a forcing function. If you say the words out loud, hey, we've got a great gender split across the organization, but we fall off at senior director and above. Well, you better have an answer to that at some point of like what you're going to do, right? And what, we're going to do. And I think a couple years ago, this was year 3, I think, also of publishing our pay equity data transparently. And Ruth, you were a huge kind of help in getting that effort off the ground. Ruth is not only a chief evangelist and also our leader of marketing, she also helps me internally with her pay equity analysis and all things where I'm like, hey, I just like need another point of view. So,
I think women wearing multitasking. There we are.
I mean, and so I think like for me, that transparency has been a forcing function. It's the reason why, like, if you've ever heard me in a webinar or whatever, I'm like, transparency is not just pay. I think it's like a forcing function for HR. But I also think like, listen, a huge kind of change maker here. I think for us is, we have a CEO who's invested in this being really important. And I think that's not just diversity across the organization, but I think like, listen, he'll hate that we ever talked about him on this. He'll absolutely hate it. But he has a powerhouse wife and, 2 amazing daughters that he talks about all the time. Right. And he loves to surround himself, I think, with really smart people. But I think there's a really big recognition of very smart, talented women. And I think that he values that. Kate and I just got off of a world tour with him. Ruth stopped by at that world tour as well. But spending a lot of time with him, I think you just see that echoed in how he shows up as a leader internally, but also how he prioritizes his life externally with his daughters and with his wife as well. And that makes a massive difference. And so, I think for me, personally, this has always been something that like I was excited about that when I came in from like an HR leader standpoint. It's been something that I think from a data standpoint that like we have invested time and space in trying to figure out that like funnel problem, right? Like, how many people are entering into the recruiting process? Like, where do people fall out? Like, all of those conversations are ones that we've had internally. But I think it's also, for me, getting the opportunity, I think, to do this job and to have been through moving into this job quickly and, getting to sit in this seat. I think it's also been, I want to make it a part of who I am as a leader and not just from an HR standpoint, but a part of like how we show up in the organization every day, how our leaders show up with their teams. And, embedding that into who you are is the only way to make changes. And, I said, Ruth has probably heard me say this. I've probably said this to you too, Kate, but I said, when I took this job, if there's ever, a day or there comes a time where I'm not being my authentic self, or like I'm in a place where, everything is kind of like in direct competition with like my philosophy or morals is like who I am, I'm not like, that's not the right thing for me. And, I think that authenticity, that's very scary. But like, I think that authenticity has been important to me. And I think that I've tried to weave that into like, this is important to me. And it's important to who we are. We greater Payscale, but also like, I think the 3 of us on this call. That I think has made those conversations not easier. They're not easy. But it's made those conversations, I think, feel more true and feel more grounded in like, well, what's the right thing? And what's the right thing for us to go do?
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, we're coming to the end of our time chatting together. So I've got 2 more questions I'd like to ask you both. Quick fire questions.
We should do this more often.
We should do this more often.
We should do this more often.
We'll see what the audience says. We'll see what the audience says.
Place. So if you're listening in and you like hearing us, just tell Ruth so that she'll have fun.
Right. Okay. I had a couple of questions that someone wanted me to ask you both. So, Kate, let's start with you. What advice would you give to women looking to break into leadership roles, especially in male-dominated industries?
I have a few pieces of advice. I think one of the most important ones for me has been the personal board of directors. Somebody introduced this to me years ago, and I didn't really understand. So I introduced it to every, person, but every woman that I meet along the way. That personal board of directors can be mixed up of like, sure, it can probably be friends and family, but it's likely people along the way who have either sponsored you in a role or mentored you or that you look up to their style. And I've actually told these people, you're on my personal board of directors, right? Like when something comes up and I have a decision to go make, I want to bounce the idea off of you. And what I think is important for women is to make sure that men are on that personal board of directors, because there are moments in time where I wonder, okay, what would a man do in this specific scenario? And I don't want that to be the case forever, because what would a woman do is just as appealing and just as wonderful. However, there are times where I check myself, even in the pay negotiation process, right? I know who I am. I know where my flaws are in terms of maybe I loved all of you so much in the interview process. I cried multiple times with like, oh my God, I found it. Was I definitely going to come in with like a heavy hand? Probably not. Right. But there was that moment where I needed to step back and say, let's negotiate what this looks like. And so I have that personal board of directors that I can go to. And there are also people like if you've got the person out there who like you go shopping with and like you come out of the dressing room and they're like hard no, like that person needs to be on your board of directors, right? Like that person who's willing to tell you the truth about where your areas of expertise are or where you may need to rethink how you're behaving is really, really important. I moved from that. I still have that into an executive coach. I'm a big believer in that. I'm also a big believer in therapy. I check myself constantly on how am I doing and where may I be settling? Where may I be leaning into sort of a stereotype or, how can I get myself out of it? How can I make myself uncomfortable? So I think that's really how I got to the C-suite is I had this group of people and a team of people who I relied on to tell me the truth. Because a lot of times I was hearing feedback like it was a personal attack. And I was taking it really hard when somebody didn't say I was perfect. I, like a lot of women out there, the two women I'm looking at especially, are really good at what we do and like being perfect. And every time somebody gave me feedback, I couldn't handle it. So I sought it out. I got comfortable with it. If I didn't like it, I went to therapy the next day, but I still sat with it. And that's the only reason why I was able to get through moments that in my career were pretty horrific. Like there were moments that could have broken me. And I got through it by having this group of people. That's my number one piece of advice is ask for their help. Stay connected, even if it's just once a year. Remind them they are on your personal board of directors because you don't know if the next day is going to be the day that you need to reach out.
That's great advice. I love that idea. Personal board of directors. What about you, Lexi?
I mean, God, I have to go after Kate. Can we edit this so I don't have to go after Kate? Because I feel like her answer is going to be better than mine. I'm going to +1 to everything Kate said. And not just because I'm +1, but I really do. I mean, I do fundamentally agree with that. Like that personal board of directors, I think like, it is not a secret if you look at, my LinkedIn, like I came into this role 5 years ago as a director and like I sit in a chief people officer role today. I will tell you and be very honest that like along the way, there were times and there are still times where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I am so hopeful that I am going in the right direction, but like the personal board of directors of just finding the people that you trust the most internally and externally within the organization, I think are huge. I think that, listen, like, I think knowing and kind of deciding who your most authentic self as a leader is and not compromising some of those things. Like I sit in this from like an HR practitioner point of view, but also just like my experience. Like there are times where I have been in organizations where like I made the decision to go because I was like, I'm not myself anymore. And that's really important to me. And that's really okay, especially as you get more senior, because it does not mean that there's not a place for you. It just means you haven't found your perfect place right now. I will tell you that I feel like, happenstance of like the last couple of years, like I feel like I have found, one of the places that has been so good to me the last few years. But also some of that is like, I have not had to compromise who I am. I show up authentically every day. Ruth and Kate will see that hopefully. But like, there are some days where I'm like having a bad day and I'm authentic. It doesn't mean that I'm, mean to people, but I'm authentically who I am. And that means I can end the day and know tomorrow will be better. But I do my best work when I'm myself. And not compromising that, I think has been such a huge part for me. I would echo something Kate said earlier, which just like, and maybe this is like sometimes what Kate and I say to each other when like we're both kind of struggling to work through an issue is like, what would a man do in this situation? And like, what does that look like? I am a direct and honest communicator. And so for me, that means like I say the thing, even when the thing is hard and I'm scared shitless. Maybe we shouldn't swear. But Ruth's not going to have us back. But I'm so scared to just say the thing out loud, but like saying the thing out loud, I think that the beautiful thing about being a woman as a leader is like, you see so many of the things that other people don't see. And that's not to say that, my peers that are male they don't see some of that, but we do. And so I think
we have a superpower.
Yes. And like finding the comfort, I think, to do that. And I also think like finding the comfort to, admit kind of authentically when you're having what Kate called earlier, I think some of like the messy moments. Again, like not a secret. I've, shared this kind of publicly, but it was a very tough kind of 2024 for me personally. And I was a better person when I showed up every day and just kind of owned that like, hey, I, wasn't having my best day. Oh man, I didn't think I was going to get a little emotional. But like that was a huge kind of pivotal moment for me within my career, but also with who I am. And I think that authenticity and having those people that are surrounding you to check you, but I think also having the people that are surrounding you to be kind of that support on a hard day. As a woman, like it's going to be hard, and like you're questioning yourself 10 times more than anybody else is ever questioning you. And I think knowing that, and like also like knowing that intellectually for me and remembering those moments has been, really helpful, I think, for me as I've tried to continue to excel, to know that I'm going to be my hardest critic 10 times more than some of the other folks around me. And there's a way out of that. Like and I think a way to kind of learn through that.
I know Ruth is going to tell us because we're almost about to be over, but you're going to, this is too good to not double click on like the leave part that you said. I think for women is so hard. I experienced it myself, and it was but you're doing so well, but you've left another role a year and a half before that doesn't look good. There was all these voices that were coming in to tell me not to follow my heart and my gut and my authenticity of who I was. And 2024 was hard for me too. And to like lower the volume, lower the temperature, try not to care as much, try to work through it, be a good corporate citizen. And when I made that choice for me, I want to say this for everybody listening, when you make the choice for you, especially as a woman, your gut already knows what you should be doing. You will step into that power and find what is right. I left the company before I found this one. And I was authentic on LinkedIn about this is my mental health. This is what I need. And the right company came to me, because we only live once. And I got to tell you, if you are in a situation where you feel undervalued or you feel not your authentic self, what are we doing this for? We're women. We have superpowers. We're moms, we're sisters, we're daughters. Don't do it. Bet on yourself. And I know it's a hard economy, and I know people will say scary things to you, but remember, you have the power. And that power could be admitting, all right, for 3 months, I got to go find something else while I still have this job. Maybe that's it. But honestly, bet on yourself. Please do it. Because at the end of the day, betting on yourself is why I got here. And I really want to see more women step into if this doesn't feel authentically right, I am brave enough to take the next step for me. And honestly, that's the answer, Ruth, for you of why I got to this place. I was brave enough to choose me and to bet on me.
Thank you. Well, we've talked a lot about authenticity. Thank you both for being so authentic and sharing how you progressed to the roles that you have today, and some of the great advice that you've shared. If you want to hear more from Kate and Lexi, you can email us at coffee@payscale.com. If you'd like to get us three back together again to chat. And if you'd like to find out more about the Gender Pay Gap Report, you can find that at payscale.com underneath our research section. I'll be back in the next episode to delve deeper into the results of this year's Gender Pay Gap study with Amy Stewart, our principal content strategist. But a huge thank you, Kate, and a huge thank you, Lexi, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Huge thank you, Ruth, for having us join you. And hopefully we'll get invited back. We'll see how we do.
We'll see.